So just to start off, I'll talk a little bit about the digital divide and why a travel priority to commercial wireless spectrum is much needed for tribal nations. So basically the digital divide for tribes refers to the high rates of disconnectivity. In a lot of the docket proceedings that have occurred in the past, tribal nations and organizations have commented that there's a huge disparity for communication services on tribal lands, starting with basically 67% of tribal lands lack access to basic wireline telephone service, and it's estimated that less than 10% of tribal lands have access to land-based broadband services. This has been documented for well over a decade by, like I said, a lot of tribal nations and organizations, but also it is reliant on 2000 census data. We're currently waiting for the release of 2010 census data that will kind of give us a better idea as to the lack of connectivity. But it is pretty well known that throughout Indian country that basic wireless services are spotty at best. And like I said, a number of the proceedings that have occurred over the past decade have tried to gather information about what that disconnectivity is and to what extent it exists in Indian country. So that basically brings us up to, as I said, a number of docket proceedings that had occurred over the past decade, but on March 3rd, 2011, the Federal Communications Commission adopted a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking for WT docket number 11-40. And this was given the name in the matter of improving communication services for Native nations by promoting greater utilization of spectrum over tribal lands. A number of tribal nations as well as organizations have provided comments on this, and I'll go over briefly those commenters in the following slides. But unfortunately, the FCC has been unable to initiate a next phase of rulemaking or close this current docket proceeding due to a lack of tribal comments and tribal participation. And that's basically what the webinar will entail today, is looking at what kind of questions are posed in the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, and also how tribes and tribal organizations have commented in response to those questions. And so, you know, a lot of it comes down to what is spectrum, or what is spectrum used for? Spectrum is basically a technical term that's used to describe airwaves and frequencies that are used for various communications technologies. So you have technologies such as smartphones. You now have the explosion of tablets like the Apple iPad or the Samsung, and things like that, but also use in different types of Wi-Fi technologies. And basically, spectrum is managed by the Federal Communications Commission in a license procedure. So in order to acquire a license, you have to first apply for one through the FCC. And then once you acquire that license, it enables you to develop your own wireless infrastructure and to actually utilize those services. And the spectrum is a finite resource similar to other natural resources on tribal lands. And so I'll go ahead and pass it off to Matthew Rantanen, who's the Director of Technology at SCTCA, and he'll be able to give you an overview about some of the issues that they're facing.
Okay, Brian, can you go ahead and advance the slide? Is it on my slide?
Yeah.
It doesn't currently have my slide up, so not sure why. Oh, there we go. Alrighty, so basic overview of the Southern California area. This is the Tribal Digital Village Network that we built, started back in 2001. And this illustration is just to show you each of the pins is where the where the reservations are in San Diego County. And if you look at the line that kind of goes across the top middle, that's the next county up to the north, and then the county barrier on the right-hand side going east or right off the map indicates Imperial County. Left side is Pacific Ocean, and down on the map is Mexico. So that's the arrangement or placement of tribes. So now, Brian, if you go to the next slide, we'll see basically one of the provider maps that shows the Southwest region, including California. And you'll see that it's red where they say they have coverage, and it's white when they say they don't have coverage, and they're building out to that location. So it's hard to tell from that map. Looking at San Diego, if you look at the bottom left-hand corner of California, it looks to me like it's fairly covered. But if you go on to the next slide, you'll see that the map shows a detail of California, and it's very hard to get to this point on the company's website to actually find this detail. It actually breaks down what services provided where in California, whereas the previous map showed red all the way across the bottom. And you can see now on this blown-up version of California, you have a lot of white space around where the Interstate 8 marker is, and you have a lot of white space around where the word California is, and to the left of the word California. And that stuff wasn't on the previous map as in detail. So then also what you're looking at is the 4G LTE service is actually only on the coast. It's only directly on the coast, and then the city centers and the adjacent areas that touch the city centers where the mass of the population is. So if you're looking at services for tribes, and if you remember the map where the tribal reservations were, all of those reservations reside in the white and light-colored salmon red on the right-hand side by the word California. So it's very deceiving as a customer. It's very deceiving as a community to try to figure out what your availability is, and testing some of that stuff and figuring out whether or not you have access to this service is difficult. I mean, it gets down to the point where, do you get a spectrum analyzer? Do you buy a big piece of equipment to do stuff? Or do you just do some really grassroots, basic level stuff where you call a friend that has a Verizon 4G service and have them come out to your reservation? Do you also call another friend that has AT&T 4G service and come out to your reservation? And you guys walk around and log the places that have and don't have access to that service to figure out if that's going to be a viable solution with you, or if it's going to be a route that you can take with a incumbent to be able to increase your service area by increasing their cell, tower intensity or something like that. And then moving forward where, you're trying to figure out, is it something that you're going to have to take on the responsibility yourself and do build out? So these proceedings that are at the FCC are asking us, to chime in and make our situations known and tell our stories and tell why these things would be beneficial to us. And this is just sort of an explanation on, some of the shortfalls that are happening in the industry today. And I think as we move into Brian Tagaban's portion of this, we'll see a little bit more in-depth detail. So I'll hand that over to Brian.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for joining us, everybody. My name is Brian Tagaban with the Telecommunications Regulatory Commission of the Navajo Nation. I want to go over an area, the slide that we're looking at now, labeled Spectrum Holdings Search Criteria, Tribe Land, Navajo Reservation. This was a portion of a spreadsheet that I was able to download from the FCC website. And you'll find this you can find a link to it if you go to broadband.gov and go to Spectrum Dashboard, and you kind of navigate your way around, and the Spectrum Dashboard has a map, and then you're able to select your tribal land. There's a button to select your tribal land. If you're able to navigate through this and you're able to get your download, you can download all the different licenses or license holders, and this is just the first page. You can see that the total number of licenses that my search criteria, which was the only search criteria was there, is just what is over the Navajo Reservation. came down with 71 different licenses, and they're listed in alphabetical order by the common name. And so the first service that we see is the common name, AT&T. There's some tags, just for search criteria tags, broadband, fixed, wireless. And then the frequency bands in megahertz. So you can see this is the 710, 716, 740, 746 band frequencies, the 700 megahertz. It shows you the licensing name. And then it shows you the market area. In this case, it shows CMA 319. And to the very right, you have the call sign in which it's been registered. So there's actually 71 of these, the full table. I didn't print out the full table here. You can see it's just one of 10 pages. But this is a quick way to find out who owns frequencies over your reservation right now. Unfortunately, what is hard to find out is what is a CMA on the market, in the market which I have in a box. Market 319, market 320, market 319 again. That is not as easy to find, and but this is we wanted to go over. This is how you can go to the FCC website, broadband.gov, and find out what frequencies have been licensed over tribal lands. So going over the market area, CMA there, 319, and Brian, could you advance the next slide? This is a slide, or this is something I had to create from ArcGIS software. And as a tribe, you have access to ArcGIS through the Department of Interior. But what I had to do is download some files from the FCC. You have my contact information if you'd like to get some of more information on this. But I downloaded the cellular market areas from the FCC and then overlaid the Navajo chapter boundaries that we have from some of our other GIS departments. And you can see the Navajo Reservation in the Four Corners area. We've got Utah up in the northeast, it's Colorado, and we have Arizona and New Mexico. The RSAs is Rural Service Area, and then there's MSA, which is Metro Service Area. There's not many examples on this map, but you can see a Metro Service Area Albuquerque there, and then there's one down in Phoenix, and then there's rural service areas. But these are the cellular market areas. And so we look over to the left-hand side, we see RSA 319, AZ2, common names Coconino, and that was actually the first market area of the AT&T's spectrum. Brian, if we could go back. We can see 319, Arizona, Coconino 2, and so AT&T has that whole area for that whole region there. And we go forward, there's 320, and so you can kind of get an idea of the different who owns spectrum and what the area looks like. And so as we go forward, there'll be some talk about build or divest. The situation that we have here in Navajo, let's talk specifically about 320 AZ3 Navajo, is AT&T may want to build down by the freeway, which is not depicted in this map here, but it runs on the southern border of the Navajo Reservation, and want to build in the high traffic areas, but then they don't want to build up into the north area toward the Hopi Reservation or toward Monument Valley, which is up north, or some of the interior areas of the Navajo Reservation, but they hold the spectrum for it. And so, this is where, because they don't feel that there's a market, or they might have other issues with getting permits from the Navajo tribe, or going through the process for getting on a tower, or some of the other things that the tribe may require. They may feel that there's not a market to build out into the Navajo Reservation. And so what I wanted to show you here is that how to distinguish the different market areas within your around your tribe. And so if we go forward, Brian, you can see there's different types of market areas. Here's a BTA, and you can see these are a little bit smaller, but these are referred to as basic trading areas. And so go next one, Brian. And here's a BEA, which is a little area. This is a basic economic area. And so this is the way, in that table, you will see the references to these acronyms, BEA and the number. And this is the territories that they're referring to. So next one, Brian. And here's a major economic area. And so, and you can see how the Navajo Reservation inside of a major economic area, which is mainly Phoenix and Albuquerque, which I do believe, I don't confirm this, but it's the areas of the television areas. So if you're in a major market area, Apache County would actually be part of Albuquerque licensing, and if you're over in Navajo County, you're in the Phoenix marketing area. But you can see how it splits the Navajo Reservation right in the center. So it poses some significant issues if the Navajo Reservation or the Navajo government wants to go over after some licenses that is in 2 different areas. Now we're having to bid for 2 large areas, which can be quite challenging for our tribe, which does not have the resources to build out or to bid on spectrum for these 2 market areas that are quite large. So I hope that gives you an idea. We've been looking at the federal FCC website on the broadband spectrum dashboard, and looking at that table and looking at some of the spectrum that has been that is available in the area or has been licensed out. Brian.
Great, thanks, Mr. Tagaban. So that kind of leads up to the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, WT 11-40, creation of a tribal priority to wireless spectrum. Some of the basic questions to ask are, what is the tribal priority to spectrum and why is it important? As Brian and Matt had alluded to, there's a lot of industry players involved in terms of, a lot of these licenses were auctioned in the past, and as we all have seen within our own tribal communities, coverage can be spotty at best. So basically what the tribal priority would do, and we'll go more into this with some of the questions posed in the rulemaking, but basically it would increase tribal entity access to spectrum licenses once they go up for auction. Then tribes and tribal entities would get a priority to bid on that license at a discount. And for the purposes of this rulemaking, the tribal entity is defined as a federally recognized tribe, a tribal consortium, or an entity that is greater than 50% owned and controlled by a tribe or tribes. So that's what the tribal priority is kind of reflective of. And the reason why it's important is, if a tribal priority were implemented for spectrum licenses, commercial spectrum licenses, then it would provide tribes with an opportunity to develop their own wireless infrastructure or provide them with negotiating power with different service providers. And it's important to recognize that because not all tribes want to develop their own wireless infrastructure. They may not have the capacity, or it may not be a priority to tribes right now. But with the tribal priority, if a tribe were to gain access to that license and actually hold that license, then it would provide them with at least some sort of negotiating power with other telecommunications providers in terms of negotiating with those providers the provision of service on tribal land. So, and then, is there any precedent that's currently in existence as far as a tribal priority has been awarded? One thing that we can look back in December of 2011, the FCC did adopt a tribal priority for low-power FM radio licenses for broadcasting. And I can talk a little bit more about NCAI's resolutions in regards to that, which I'll touch in the next slides. But basically, what we've been trying to advocate for, based on what our membership desires, is to extend that travel priority to be inclusive of not only low-power FM radio, but also these commercial wireless spectrum licenses. And so this is kind of just a timeline of the different tribal nation and tribal organizations that have commented on this proceeding, WT 11-40. The National Tribal Telecommunications Association was one of the first tribal organizations to provide comments, and they done that in May of 2011. And shortly thereafter, NCAI and Native Public Media filed joint reply comments in June 2011, followed also by the Navajo Nation Telecommunications Regulatory Commission. And then also on October 9th, the FCC Office of Native Affairs filed an ex parte filing in a meeting that they had with NCAI. Basically, that meeting outlined certain resolutions that were passed at our mid-year conference in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And one of the resolutions was NKE 11-004, which was in support of improving communication services for tribal communities, where our membership explicitly referenced this docket, WT 11-40, and called for certain provisions to be enacted and the docket proceeding to commence. Following that, on August 12th, the FCC filed an ex parte. These were based on briefing materials that were included in a 2011 White House Native American Business Leaders Roundtable, where, again, there were certain references regarding this docket proceeding and creation of a travel priority to commercial wireless spectrum. And on August 18th, the FCC Native Nations Broadband Task Force filed an ex parte on certain spectrum issues as well. And Matt and Brian Tagaban are also members of that task force.
Brian, can I interrupt for a second and go back to that slide?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make something apparent here. I guess what we're trying to do is create a better public record coming from more angles of Indian country, because you know, we do have the Office of Native Affairs and Policy at the FCC, and what that does is it gives us leverage at the FCC. Now, to make that leverage work, we need to give them ammo, and that ammo is essentially comment on the public record to support our arguments that we have in private conversations, that we have in our, National Congress of American Indians meetings. We, when we get together as groups and we talk about these things that we want, our outlet at the FCC is ONAP, and ONAP listens to that and then takes that and puts the rulemakings out and adjusts the rulemakings as they see fit. But if we don't support that in these comments, it's not going to come full circle, and we're not going to get what we're wanting. Now, to go down that list from May 20, June 20, August 9, and August 18th, National Tribal Telecommunications Association, neither Brian Tagaban and I are associated with, but I'm the chairman of the board of Native Public Media, so I'm involved with the June 20 comments. Brian is the Navajo Nation's Telecommunications Regulatory Commission on that 20th. On August 9th and 12th, the FCC is talking about stuff that happened at NCAI, and then again on August 18th, both Brian and I are part of that Native Nations Broadband Task Force. So it's the same, a lot of the same players making comments through different channels, but we're not getting a big diversity or a widespread, voice chiming in on this, and it's going to be important moving to the future to get a bigger response from a wider variety of tribal organizations. Sorry, just want to put that in there.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Matt, because this next slide actually reiterates a lot of the points that you brought up. Again, on October 24th, Brian Tagaban, your NNTRC, provided an ex parte filing where, again, this WT 11-40 was referenced. And then again with NCAI, both at our mid-year conference and our annual conference that just occurred. At our mid-year conference, Jefferson Keel had drafted a letter in support of a tribal priority for this commercial mobile radio services, again highlighting the notion that it would enable tribes to hold license for development of infrastructure or provide them with that negotiating power. And again, we had another resolution reaffirming the previous one that we had adopted at Milwaukee with some certain new provisions due to different regulatory changes that had occurred at the FCC. In part, the spectrum allocation for the low-power FM radio tribal priority. And then again, at our annual conference in Sacramento, again, we passed a resolution that acknowledged President Keel's comments in the letter they had submitted to the FCC, and then those were incorporated into a resolution which are now a standing policy for NCAI. So just to go over real quickly, what are the key issues for the tribal priority, and some of these are highlighted within the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. And I've included the link there to the actual document that's posted on the FCC's website, and that document is the full Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. But for the purposes of our time that we have now, we'll discuss certain options that are provided within the NPRM, which is the builder divest issue, tribal lands construction safe harbor, reforms to the tribal lands bidding credit system, the definition of tribal lands and geographic service areas, and also the legal authority of regulating spectrum holders. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to Brian Tagaban to talk about some of the issues with pertaining to the legal authority of tribes to regulate spectrum holders.
Oh, thank you, Brian. Well, the Navajo Nation Regulatory Commission is unique to a lot of tribes. The Navajo Nation, unlike other tribes, has not pursued owning its own telecom company. So we would fall short in a lot of the tribal priority areas if we were to go after spectrum at this point. And it would be because we don't really own a company from the tribe. We do have some other enterprises that are going into this now, but apart from that, the regulatory aspect of trying to regulate a company is where you're trying to take advantage of the market power, and you want to take advantage of capital that other companies or other types of investors are able to input into a company. As a tribe, you want to just make sure that the services that your consumers are protected, and that the build-out follows a schedule that's in the public interest or in your tribe's interests, to where you set the priorities for the build-out. Unfortunately, due to the 1996 Wireless or Telecommunications Act, wireless providers are not regulated, and so they're outside the regulatory authority of even states. And so they've enjoyed this build-out or this regulatory-free environment, and only having to abide to the FCC, and that's for their license holdings. And so it's not until recently that some recent sales or a combination of different companies, and particularly Verizon, where they acquired licenses from buying other companies, where the FCC mandated that they build out more, they upgrade their build out schedule to, because they got all these new licenses. But those type of rulings don't come out very often, and the authority for states to do that is nil, and the authority for tribes to do that is nil. And so this is where the tribes want to get a foothold and say, well, you own spectrum over our land. We want to have a say and say you can't just build out where the populations are. You can't just cherry pick in the areas that you want to build out because you feel this is where you're going to make money. We have an interest for you to go out to this area albeit that we don't want to see you go broke, but we want to see that there is a meaningful build out into areas that we feel that are in our interest. So each tribe must make that. So that's that's one of the challenges that we have, and the Navajo Nation, the NNTRC, is taking several steps to help in this. So I hope I can educate you more on later on the activities of the NNTRC specifically in this area. But it is something the NNTRC is looking into, and that all tribes should be getting behind in some fashion that is best in their interest to get more authorities over regulating spectrum holders. Thank you, Brian.
Great, thanks, Brian. So this next slide, on this call we have, Brian Tagaban, who comes from an entity that represents a very large land-based tribe, and then we also have Matthew Rantanen, who, with the Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association, they're a consortium of 19 smaller land-based tribes. So the definition of tribal lands and how those geographic service areas come into play over large land base versus small land base is definitely one of the more important issues, and I just wanted to pass it off to you two to kind of talk about some of those unique issues for your respective entities.
Okay, thanks. So this is Matt Rantanen again. So essentially when you're looking at the different reservations throughout the country, the different geographic limitations and opportunities that exist, you have several different situations, and that's why when we're building out networks and things, not one shoe fits every foot, if you will. There's always a hybridized solution that serves these different geographic locations, and that's the same with spectrum. The way that Brian showed those maps of Navajo, where if AT&T grabbed a certain region based on the licensing structure, half of that region could be reservation land and half of it may not be. And if they chose not to develop that that one portion, then they would be without service. So the definition of a tribal land for the purposes of spectrum is important, because right now we're kind of setting the precedent for what will be the future. And I think we need to have comments in there that support things like, okay, so you're a small reservation. Let's say in San Diego County we have several very, very small reservations that have purchased land adjacent to their tribe to try to increase their land mass. So they have, in some situations, put that land into trust or waiting for that land to get approved to be in trust. And some of us think that should be a definition of a tribal land, land that's held by a tribal entity, even if it's not been put into trust. Let's say you buy orchards or some agricultural development adjacent to your reservation to support your tribe. Some land to secure water rights, some other things like that. You're going to always want to have the opportunity to own the spectrum over that land. Just like when you buy land as a private, non-tribal person, you want your mineral rights to your own property. You want to be able to do the things that everybody else can do to their property to your own property, and that includes those airwaves, in our opinion. So we got to make sure that we include all the pieces of tribal lands that are possible. Lands that are in trust, lands that are working to become in trust, purchased lands by tribes. Some tribes have offset their reservations to do an economic development project, and they've moved their population off of the existing reservation onto adjacent space that may not be tribal land yet. All of those things need to be put into consideration, because there's opportunity there to make sure that for the future everything is designed properly. And before I hand it over to Brian Tagaban, I'm just going to say a few things about the definition or defining geographic areas, the issue of bleeding communications. All this communication that we're talking about is airwaves, and if you know anything about airwaves and radio communications, when you turn on a signal and you have it broadcasting in 360 degrees, you're going to get a varying distance depending on geographic obstacles, on how far that will go into, the next region. So if you have a designated service area, how do you define that service area so that you're allowed to service that area, but then if there's something right next to it, are you going to bleed into that? Is it going to be a problem? One of the big things that comes up is the borders of the United States, so the northern border with Canada and the southern border with Mexico. And one of the things we fought with it in the white spaces realm of frequency was the fact that there's a 45-mile exclusion zone from the north and south borders where you're not supposed to be able to use that white spaces equipment because you're interfering with Canada and Mexico. So we did I don't know if it was a petition for reconsideration or something to try to convert that. So during the white spaces release, that actually got put into the rulemaking, and it's something that Southern California Tribal Chairman spearheaded, is because we're so close to the Mexican border, 9 of our reservations would not be able to use that white spaces technology in the future. So, this bleeding technology, these bleeding concepts of airwaves moving over invisible boundaries or physical boundaries is important to consider, and a lot of your tribal reservations are sitting next to something, a town, a border, another reservation, where you want to consider those things in your comments. Brian, go ahead and fill in the blanks.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Sorry, thank you, Matt. Yeah, I think you fill in the major points. I just want to reiterate that your interests, when you're defining your interests of your tribe, the border areas or where the major areas where your population may go for markets or for other types of quality of life. Those are the areas that you want to be concentrating on, as that's where your population is going to be. For Navajo, my main examples are going to be the border towns, Gallup, Flagstaff, Farmington. They all are major areas that are around the reservation that a lot of our population goes. So it is in the interest that the Navajo Reservation have access to spectrum in those areas, because we contribute a lot to those economics of those border towns. And so we would, it would be in our interest that we be able to provide or have access to, or Navajo people have access to spectrum as they travel to these areas, and not be beholden to roaming agreements or losing roaming minutes because they have a reservation phone that is only good for a reservation, and then when they go to a border town, then they're using roaming minutes, and so defining a geographical area that's in the interests of the Navajo people is something important. So I think it's something to keep in mind. The other example that we have on Navajo, I think Matt already kind of talked about, just reiterate again, is different status areas. In the Navajo Reservation, our eastern area is considered checkerboard. The map I showed shows the exterior boundaries, but if you take a look at the FCC site and you look at the Navajo lands, it does not look like the map that I showed you on the slides. And so that's a big difference. The tribe sees the Navajo Reservation one way, and then the FCC sees the tribal borders in another way. And so I think that's what they're asking here is how should we define the geographic areas? And I think tribes should have a big input on how their geographic areas are shown and what interest they have, and I think other areas included, like I mentioned before, border towns and where the populations may go, for quality of life. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So we'll go ahead and move on to the build or divest issue. This is one of the major proposals under the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. This one would require current license holders to, quote, build infrastructure to unserved and underserved tribal lands, but if they don't agree to, then they must divest their license to the spectrum in an auction process. So if we look at page 18, paragraph 54 of the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, they seek comment on implementation if this process is adopted. And one of the questions they pose is if a tribal entity, again, tribal entity being a federally recognized tribal consortia, or a entity that is wholly owned and controlled by the tribe in more than 50% of their operations, they must file a notice of intent to initiate process only after the relevant licensee had met the applicable construction requirement. And the construction requirement is a whole other issue as well. Brian and Matt, I don't know if you want to touch briefly about that whole issue.
Brian, if you would, that would be great, because I don't have much experience with that.
Well, so the area that I would touch on is that the qualifying entity. I mean, it has to be 51% owned, and I spoke of this before, is where the Navajo tribe would only have one entity right now that could almost fit into that, and that's one of our wireless entities that's an LLC. But the build and divest area, I think, is an area that I think the tribe should concentrate on the most. So the tribes would show that there's no intent for these companies to come out and build out into the tribal areas, and they may file a letter saying that we may not build out into like we'll say in the area of Navajo because of different issues, and they could cite those different issues, cost, market, or other types of energy. But then if you're going to go after this, you have to show that you're going to be able to build out, and to meet the requirements, can be a struggle. That means you're going to be able to put up a tower, and be able to put up a radio, and then put up the infrastructure, and then be able to run a station, or run a tower with all the proper agreements in place to handle all the traffic. And that can be a monumental task of trying to be a telephone provider, to where you're going to make all the agreements that if a call comes into your tower, that you can hand it off to anybody else, or meet all the 911 requirements. So that can be a daunting task. I think that's what they're asking here, that they're saying here, that it has to satisfy its final construction requirements for the license on the server area. I think this is where it can be quite tough for tribes to implement this.
Honestly, it's the reason why Tribal Digital Village Network has not moved into phone services. There's so much regulation and so much restriction to the type of service that we provide. Currently, we provide broadband services through wireless, through fixed microwave wireless, and we realize it's not that big of a step to move into supporting some of these mobile services, but the definition of our land space working as a consortium versus, like a larger reservation such as yours, Brian, really brings a lot of county land in between a lot of our reservation space, and makes it a very complex issue as far as regulation and service area, even E911 or regular 911, all the different services involved, and then trying to build infrastructure that would support even a larger space than we already do with our fixed broadband.
Okay, thanks. And so this slide kind of actually talks a little bit about that also, in terms of another additional question that's posed in the NPRM, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, is on page 20, paragraph 59. They seek comment on requiring a tribal entity to submit an application demonstrating qualifications to hold an FCC license. Some of those qualifications revolve around the language that's included in that paragraph, kind of hint towards the notion that tribes are looking to develop their own infrastructure. But again, for any comments that are developed, they should stress the point that not all tribes want to develop their own tribal telcos per se, or their telecommunications companies. but rather that, there's recognition that tribes may want to acquire those licenses to use in negotiations with providers. So that's just another issue that's raised in the NPRM. And again, on the NPRM Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, the page 20, paragraph 60, is seeking comment on certain construction requirements for unserved tribal areas that are relicensed to a tribal entity. So this kind of looks at, if a tribal priority is adopted and tribes or tribal entities acquire that license to spectrum over their land, what kind of construction requirements should be established for that. The proposed requirement in the proposed rulemaking states that a tribal entity must provide the same level of service within 3 years. This same level of service is equivalent to if, say, you're AT&T or Verizon or any other kind of telecommunications provider, if they had that license before and had opted to keep the license and build onto tribal land, then they have to provide a certain level of service within 3 years of making that decision. So this question asks, should tribes be required or held to that same standard? And again, where is the funding going to come from? We have the mobility and tribal mobility fund auctions. There's USDA Rural Utility Service loans and grants. What other sources are out there for that? And Brian or Matt, I don't know if you want to speak on that issue a little bit.
But in a lot of situations, there might be same level of service within 3 years as no service. If they hold the license over the space and then you get the license over the tribal entity, you may have an opportunity to build out anything within that 3 years because you're not actually competing with a previous standard.
I would say is that, you're really fighting an uphill battle on this, and your tribes are being thrown into the deep end of the pool in terms that they're fighting to make a profitable business in an area where a highly capitalized company has decided not to build into. And so if tribes are going to get into this, I mean, it's going to require a lot of technical assistance, and it's going to require a lot of capital and a slow return on investment. I think that's what a lot of these companies have already discovered, and so that's why they're not building out into these areas. And even if a tribe was even to get into what is proposed here, a licensing into to tribal priority, they still have to show that they can meet all these requirements, which is what's going to be a challenge in itself. As Matt has pointed out, in the digital village, I mean, it is a big undertaking to take that next step because it is a highly regulated area. And so, this is where this is where the Navajo Nation has, realized that it takes a lot of outside capital to invest in these areas, and we've seen this is where we need to build the partnerships, the public-private partnerships. But if tribes were given some leverage or given, had access to the spectrum as an asset that could be then brought to the table to utilize or to entice or give incentives to other entities that have capital to come into this area and reduce their cost. So they can be profitable in a tribal area, because the overwhelming aspect of this is not profit to the tribe, but actually just service. And so we want to reduce the costs for these entities to come onto the reservation, but the tribe also needs to bring something to the table. Right now, the Navajo Nation is just in the situation where the only thing we really can bring to the table is a easier licensing regime for coming onto the reservation and for easier access to land. But these areas are also portions of revenue for our tribe, and so as we go forward, I mean, we have to make the choice in the long term. Do we want to relinquish an access to revenue, or and even that, is that enough to provide the incentive for these tribes to come in? So I think, having a licensing or some sort of solution in this area can really help tribes have leverage into enticing companies to come onto the reservation if they're not the AT&T, but maybe a smaller provider that has decided to make this part of their business model. Like, one of our companies has one of this business model and has done this around the world, and they're doing this on the reservation now here. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Tagaban and Matthew. So the next slide kind of highlights another issue within the Notice of Proposal. It's the Tribal Lands Construction Safe Harbor. It's on page 21, paragraphs 61 through 67. And one of the questions that's posed is the requirement that wireless radio licensee must satisfy construction to cover at least 75% of the geographic area that the tribal lands of the tribal lands that the license would cover. NCAI and Native Public Media have filed joint comments, and as well as NNTRC have filed comments that support requirements to have carriers market services and prove that it has travel customers if they have that license. But the 75% aspect is something that we would like to get more input on, especially from tribes, in determining what that kind of requirement would look like. And Brian and Matt, I don't know if you want to expand upon that.
I mean, it would be nice if we could have 100% coverage. By putting a partially complete coverage requirement means that somebody's left out. And, I think that's part of the problem all along, is that the big telcos have been required to cover a certain amount of percentage to become successful. And as I speak on panels throughout the country and actually around the world, when I talk with telecom officials on the same panels, they're jumping up and down about how excited they are that they have 98.5% of the United States covered in telephone service and wireline service. And the unfortunate thing is that 1.5% that they don't get is mostly tribal or extremely rural, which is the tribal scenario. So it would be nice if we were looking at a 100% model and focusing on tribal lands to be served 100% or at least 100% of the population base.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, this is Brian Tagaban. Yeah, I'm not really convinced on this on the safe harbor type things. That it's been an area that I'd like to get more details on talking maybe to ONAP and maybe getting some other having more dialogue with more groups on this.
Okay, and we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide, talking about the tribal lands bidding credit system. On the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, it's page 21 to 23, paragraph 68 to 74. The tribal lands bidding credit system has been a program that has come under scrutiny in the previous years with a number of tribes that have filed comments in various different proceedings. Basically, a lot of it has revolved around the recognition of poor programmatic reporting standards in the past. And Mr. Tagaban, I know that you can talk a little bit about a TLBC recipient that's on Navajo. If you don't mind talking about that for a little bit.
I'm sure, Brian. Yeah, and throughout this whole process, I've been advocating for a stronger reporting requirement for all tribes in all aspects. And I think a lot of that was reflected within the tribal engagement provisions that recently came out. The practice that I was not keen on or really opposed was the practice of providers coming to tribal leaders, making a presentation, basically a sales presentation, a marketing presentation, and then maybe before a leader or the council or whatever your structure is, and then getting a letter of recommendation and taking that, and then with that letter of recommendation, getting credits. Essentially, getting using the tribal name and using that as a coupon to get spectrum. And then once they got the spectrum, their build out, there was no requirements or there was a lack of reporting requirements for for the entity to come back to the tribe, and recourse for the tribe to say that this is not going as well as we thought it was going to go out. And so that so that's been a struggle. And in the early days of when one of our companies, specifically ComNet, did get this type of endorsement, and then it wasn't until later on that we started, enforcing or trying to enforce, that we found out that we lack these type of we don't have any authority over or making sure that they build out. So you're kind of left up to the provider in that area. Fortunately, they've been a pretty good provider, and this is their market niche. But as you go forward, I want to make sure that all the other tribes do not get into a situation where they lend their name and then they don't have any recourse for making sure that there's a certain service penetration within their area. And so I think that if this program is going to continue, that there has to be requirements on who actually owns the spectrum and what the tribes can do if they don't feel that they're being treated fairly. There must be some recourse in some forum for maybe even for something to happen that the tribe can feel comfortable with, because we want to make sure that the tribe also keeps its sovereignty and is able to control its own destiny on its own land. And when it's lending its name to another company for a bidding credit, then they should have a fair forum for recourse if things are not going their way. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Brian. So those are some of the main points that are highlighted in the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. Again, this document is fairly extensive, and I mean we could spend hours talking about the various items that are proposed and questions asked, but for time's sake, those are some of the main points that are highlighted. But again, myself, Brian Tagaban, Matthew Rantanen, and many others are available to answer any types of questions that you may have. Next, I'm going to talk about how to file comments with the Federal Communications Commission. And basically, for a lot of their rulemaking procedures, they create different types of rulemakings. There's types such as a notice of inquiry, where they'll propose certain questions that will go out for public comment. People will respond, and then based on the response, they may move to the next phase of rulemaking, like a notice of proposed rulemaking or a further notice of proposed rulemaking. But for this certain proceeding, it's a notice of proposed rulemaking, and this is a link to comment in the electronic comment filing system, which is the FCC's portal, to receive those comments. So I'm just going to go through a really brief run through about how you file those types of comments. So for this proceeding, it would be 11-40, which is the notice of proposed rulemaking. Again, the name of your filer, which in our instance would be National Congress of American Indians. And a lot of people have been kind of thrown off by this law firm requirement or the attorney author name, their email address. If you don't have an attorney that's drafting your comments, you don't need to disclose that. And then again, your types of filings. There's numerous different types of filings that are conducted through the FCC, but for the purposes of this one, it would be a comment, or if you were to have your travel delegation to go in and talk with the FCC's bureau staff or commissioner staff or even the commissioners, you would file an ex parte proceeding. That's public record to notify the public about what it is you went in to discuss. And then again, necessarily need to worry about the file report, bureau identification number. Enter your address. So our address would be 1516 P Street, Northwest, Washington, D.C., and so on and so forth. Then you can attach your document. You've created a PDF. You can pull it up from your drive and attach it. You'll hit continue, and it'll take you to a next page, which will kind of verify your content. You'll have the ability to review what information you have submitted and the documents that you have attached, and then you can actually file it. And once you file it, you'll get a confirmation page, which will give you a proceeding number where you can track that filing, and it'll show you if it's been posted publicly in the docket system. So that's the gist of our presentation. And again, we welcome any questions or comments. I see that there were a few questions that were raised during the presentation, and I'll go ahead and address those first. And so our first question comes from Miss Deborah Flute. Brian Tagaban, she had a question for you regarding how our checkerboard reservations addressed in geographic areas.
Thank you for the question. Yes, it is an issue, sticking issue for the FCC right now on how to address these. But the Navajo Nation is taking a position, and we're taking a position that we would like to see our exterior boundaries recognized. And so in the map that I showed on the slides before is what we recognize. This is what our land department recognizes. We first asked the FCC that could we please recognize this area. The second step is that you also need to go to the other regulatory agency that has jurisdiction, and that's going to be the states. So this is where you need to probably go to the states. In our case, in the Navajo Reservation, it would be the New Mexico Public Regulatory Commission. And we've engaged them on this issue, and we've made a presentation specifically on this issue. And so there's going to be a bit of negotiation process involved. They have an obligation, the state has an obligation to make sure that the residents that are non-tribal, that are living in non-tribal areas on the reservation have their public interest protected. But I think there can be a negotiation if the states and the tribes come together in good faith. But that's the process that we'll have to take, and that's the way we're going forward. The other portion to that is to have a reason for having an exterior boundary recognized. Not that you want to establish a new border, but it is more in the public interest to say that, you know, we recognize this area, and in this area we plan to, you know, regulate for this reason. This is what we deem to be the public interest. This is what we're looking after. And if you scope that very narrowly, then you may be able to come to more of an agreement to what you're going to regulate. In this case, it's telecommunications. What area of telecommunications are you going to regulate? Are you going to be licensing incumbents, or just going to be, doing other types of licensing regimes, so that's where the negotiation will happen. And so, and you want to stay within your scope and your reasons of why regulating as you go forward. But having the FCC recognize the area, I think, is important, and they did bring this up in this rulemaking.
Additionally, this is Matt Rantanen. Additionally, they, in the Native Nations Broadband Task Force in several different instances, working with the Office of Native Affairs and policy, checkerboarded reservations have come up on a frequent basis, and defining the exterior border of that group of checkerboarded pieces is beneficial to tribes, but it's also beneficial to those individuals that may be on the non-tribal portions in that checkerboard. Now, a lot of reservations have begun to, if they have economic sustainability, have begun to purchase the land that is in the non-tribal checkerboard piece, the non-tribal squares, and reacquire that space and try to make a solid reservation area. But there are folks living on some of those non-tribal squares that are in the same exact restricted access to broadband, to cellular service, to this communication resource as the tribal members. So there can be an argument made that you're going to serve everybody within that exterior boundary, benefiting those non-tribal members as well.
Great, thanks. And again, if you have a question, you can type it in your control pane, or there's also an option where you can raise your hand and it'll flag me to unmute your line if you want to voice a question as well. And next we have a comment from Miss Madonna Yawaki, and I'll go ahead and unmute your line.
Hello, Brian. My name is Madani Yawaki, and I am an owner of an American Indian telecommunication engineering company. As I'm listening to the comments, and I'm thinking of the things that we do, because we have helped tribes purchase commercial spectrum by partitioning and disaggregating that spectrum. And when it's unused, and it's an engineering process where you have to prove that it's not being used or not serving the tribal communities where part of it is intended to serve. So that's something that is very common that's done when you have people that are engineers associated with the kind of efforts that we're working on today. I am an American Indian. I'm an enrolled member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. And I say that because I think that when I look at these issues, I look at them, and I've always, our work has always been geared toward tribal ownership. Whenever we work with tribes, we work with them to obtain ownership of spectrum, because I consider it the same as land. And I mean, it's an asset. It's a tribal asset. And so our goal in working with tribes is to not, in some arrangements, what we've seen with other companies that work with tribes is they have, they take 51% ownership of the spectrum. And in the case that when we work with tribes, we develop it so it's 100% owned by the tribe. I think that gives the tribe great leverage, and because of all the reasons that you discussed. And so I wanted to say those, that part is like, it's a typical process, and it's one the FCC recognizes is partitioning and disaggregating spectrum when it's unused for commercial spectrum. And then the long-term goals for ownership of spectrum, I think it really makes a difference in what the tribe's economic objectives are. Because ultimately, like you discussed, tribes will not, a lot of tribes may not have an interest in owning systems that are very complex. But what I would say to that is that these systems that are technology-based, and there's technical experts that work in this area. I wanted to talk about the Connect America funds as they apply to the build-out requirements. When we designed the first tribal-owned wireless company, we placed towers in each district, and the Connect America fund had not even been defined, or even wasn't even being on the table at the time. But what we believe is that in any company that serves tribal lands, there's cost supports that they receive for serving high-cost service areas and also low-income subscribers. So there's several resources, or two pots primarily of money that supports these rural telephone companies. And these systems have to be designed and provide service to meet those requirements before they can obtain those resources. So I think that adding the goals of Connect America Fund, which is to place towers where people live, and versus the first auction, which was not focused on tribal. It was just throughout wherever there's unserved and underserved areas. That one considered along road miles, but the Tribal Mobility Fund on tribal lands is for placing those towers where the people live. So I just wanted to add those comments, and I appreciate this webinar today. Thank you.
Brian, this is Brian Tagaban.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and respond.
Yeah, those are great comments. Those are exactly, I think she's right on line with a lot of stuff that we were speaking of earlier. And one of the things that we want to recognize is that it is a complex process for engineering. And I think a lot of tribes could comment in that, maybe they be allocated resources by the FCC to get some of these, the talent that's out there that can do this. It's not trivial. I think Matt talked about it a little bit and how, he would approach it in terms of just calling up people, trying to find out what spectrum is available by just taking out a phone and seeing if you have service within an area. I mean, that's a simple way of going about it. And of course, the other side is where you have an engineer come out with their credentials and also with their expertise, and coming out with equipment to actually, to do the engineering for this. But this could be cost prohibitive to tribes that do not have this resource. And on the Navajo Reservation, which is very large, this is very cost prohibitive, for the tribe to undertake this, and it is of great risk. When you start talking about actually building out these systems, yes, the ETC designation does give you access to the USAC funding, the high cost and low income. But on Navajo's experience, it still takes a well-capitalized company to undertake this in order to get the rate of returns that can make the company viable. And so it is, and the reporting back is something that needs to be considered. There's examples of tribal companies right now that I know are very stressed over the changes in the Connect America Fund, and so it is a risky proposition. But I think is that if we get a better handle on spectrum as an asset, like it was talked about before, I think we can help entice companies to come on, and also look at the long-range viability of this being a revenue stream for tribes. If it is seen as an asset, just like it is as land. So I really appreciate those comments. Thank you.
I just wanted to chime in too and say that I really appreciate the 100% ownership of the spectrum, and then the third-party companies become, contracted in or brought in as a provider and to use the spectrum that's owned by the tribe. It's a really great concept, and I'd love to see comments come in that look like that. The other thing about the Connect America Fund and some of the funding that's coming out at the federal level is, those of you that already are, it's easy, but those of us that aren't, ETCs, it's another big hurdle for some of us. I mean, we're a broadband provider here in Southern California. We have, over about a quarter of our tribal homes connected. We're moving towards, like a 2/3 penetration rate at any given time, supporting our tribal customers with broadband support. And it's a network that's been developed in 2001, and we're still going here, about to turn over to 2013. So we consider ourselves a very big success. But, we couldn't have done it without grants and community support, tribal support, and we are tribally owned and tribally operated, and all based on tribal land. So, we're doing all the things that we're supposed to be doing, from a consortium of 19 different tribes. But to step into the arena of becoming an ETC, where we're providing broadband, we're not providing voice, we don't have a lot of requests for voice, it's a difficult step for us, and that's one of the things that I think is probably slowing some folks down at the tribal level on moving towards Connect America Fund and some of those other features that are at the federal level.
Great, thanks Matt and Brian. So we did have a comment raised also regarding the activities of the Native Nations Broadband Task Force. And Brian and Matt, I know that you're both members, but there was some concern raised about information about the activities that NNBT, the Broadband Task Force, are involved in, and how that kind of lack of information and communication impedes like consensus on these important issues. I don't know if you two want to talk briefly about your work in that task force and how communications can be improved for between the task force and the Indian country overall.
Well, I mean, there's several opportunities. The Office of Native Affairs and Policy has an open door, you know, every single workday of the year, and they entertain comments that they will bring to the task force every day. So if you have an issue and you want to talk, you know, call Jeffrey Blackwell's staff and, you know, illustrate your points that need to be thought about at the task force level. The task force, unfortunately, does not meet as often as it should because of the budget restrictions that are at the federal level. I mean, Office of Native Affairs and Policy was put in place, and it was never given a formal budget. Now they're doing a cutback at the FCC to reduce everybody's budget. It's hard to reduce when you start at zero. So one of the things that we're trying to do is to establish a budget for the Native Affairs and Policy so that they can be more engaged with more tribes, do more regional ITI training, you know, the broadband and the telecom 101, where they can get out and work in each region and work with each individual tribe and gather those comments to work with. The task force is made up of a bunch of different people from different regions with different expertise based on telecommunications and broadband. And it's a cross-section of Indian country. It's certainly in no way completely representative of everyone in Indian country, of course. The easiest way to get information to that task force is through that office. But if you know a member on the Native Nations Broadband Task Force, there are, I believe, 19 tribal appointed or tribal official members. And those people are, I mean, if you know one of those people, we're an open conduit to bring information to that task force as well. And we honestly are here to, you know, accept information and accept comment and accept different ideas and proposals from different tribes, and we'll be glad to speak your voice at that meeting and make sure that your comments are heard. But, you know, the easiest way to do that for a lot of issues is to make comment on public record on you know, the FCC proceedings, and make public and comment, or, you know, the comments on the record that are in support of other people's comments. So if somebody puts a comment up that's tribal based and it says all the things you need to say, then just support that comment, and you don't even have to write your own comment. I mean, getting out there and making your voice heard publicly at this level is really key. Calling the Native Affairs and Policy Office is a great way to get information directly to them, and that will be presented at the next task force meeting, which there are about 4 per year. So I don't know that its attempt was to exclude anybody from being able to bring information in. I think it's more of a reaching out to Indian country and trying to, you know, grab folks that are working hard in this arena already to try to make the right, at least have some of the right knowledge in the room when the FCC is trying to make decisions on stuff. The last thing we want is the FCC making decisions with no tribal influence. So having 19 different tribal representatives is a big start, and then opening up that to the rest of the tribes. I mean, we are at all the functions. We're at the National Congress of American Indians Telecom subcommittees. We're at all the different things. So don't hesitate to grab a task force member that you know of or call the office directly.
Thanks. And Brian, did you have anything to add?
No, I think it covers it. I think Matt covered it very well. I guess, well, let me add this. I mean, the task force hasn't met as much as we've liked to, and so to think that, you know, there's information that we don't have or haven't been able to pass out is I think it would be a misconception. I think what you covered within your slides actually was fairly accurate. Those are the issues that we discussed, and trying to review these topics and understand the topics, and we put in our comments in verbally at that point, and that's really what we covered. Thank you.
Thanks. So another comment that was raised was the definition of travel lands in the FCC's Notice of Proposed Rulemaking is narrowed from the National Broadband Plan definition, which is something I'll have to go back and look at specifically to compare those languages. But the comment was raised that the narrow definition is of great concern because it excludes near reservation eligibility, which, when we talked about our travel lands and geographic areas on that slide, the determination of which lands will be eligible for spectrum licenses or how do you redefine certain service areas, that's something that we'll have to look at in terms of, what's proposed in the National Broadband Plan. The National Broadband Plan was the creation of the ARA stimulus funding, where the FCC compiled this very long and extensive document that included comments from nearly a decade of different rulemakings that they have proposed. But it also included a lot of footnotes from comments that were, again, filed by a lot of travel nations and travel organizations that, kind of brought to light the issue of disconnectivity on travel lands. So that's an issue that I'll look into for sure, and hopefully follow up with you guys about that. And then looking at the control pane, again, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to send it in the questions pane or to raise your hand on the again on the control pane. And I see right now that Loris Taylor has a question, and I'll go ahead and unmute you. Loris, are you there? I think we lost Loris. Okay, so moving on, I have another comment that came in regarding the USDA pseudo provisions. Brian and Matt, I'm not sure if you're aware of those.
I'm not well versed in it.
What was that again, a pseudo provision?
Yeah, it's the USDA substantially underserved trust area provisions. They were a series of regulations that the USDA just released last year.
No, I'm not familiar with those.
So is it the new definition of underserved areas, or is it following the tribal proposal for that?
Yeah, from just going off the cuff from what I remember about the pseudo provisions, the pseudo provisions provided a waiver of non-duplication fees, and a lot of it had to do with the rural utility service loan and loan guaranteed programs. Again, I can't speak to it fully right now. I'd have to refer back to some of the notes I've compiled, but that is another issue that we'll definitely have to kind of monitor the implementation because, again, a lot of funding for telecommunications infrastructure comes from USDA funding, so we'll have to monitor that, and I can send out a email that kind of explains the pseudo provisions in more detail. Again, and I apologize, I can't speak wholly to that issue. But let me see here. If there's anyone else that has a question, please don't hesitate to, again, write the question in the comment box or raise your hand. All right, and I'll go ahead and put up our contact information in case anyone else has any questions. And that's where all of us can be reached. And some of the next steps that we'll be looking at are development of a template letter or comments. If anyone that attended the webinar would be interested in kind of drafting a template letter, I'd be happy to work with any and all of you in terms of getting those comments into the docket system and hopefully getting this proceeding moving next. But also, if you have any ideas regarding some future webinars that NCAI could put on, different issue areas. One of the things that we will be looking at next are the tribal government engagement obligation provisions. In short, we call them the tribal engagement provisions, and these were created through the Connect America Fund order that came out last year. And Brian, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about that.
Sure. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, in the USF ICC reform, it's now required for ETC providers that have received high cost and that are covering reservations to engage tribes. And so there's been guidelines sent out by ONAP in July, which kind of gives some guidelines for both the providers and for tribes into what these engagements should be tailored to or should kind of look like. It's really up to the tribe and to the providers to come together, but it does give some deadlines. The providers should be contacting the tribes now, and the deadline is in July for the providers to provide back a report to the FCC. And it's going to be also the tribes have some obligations within that. Also should be putting together their requirements and some of their outlines following the guidance for the providers to follow and to report back to the FCC on the providers coming forward to them and talking to them. So it is happening now.
Great, and again, it's another issue that NCAI will be looking at, and it's definitely something that's come up on the radar for a lot of tribes, but we need to kind of coordinate how we're going to deal with that issue. But the tribal engagement provisions, again, were the result of the National Broadband Plan, where tribes voiced an overwhelming concern that telecommunications providers were not engaging with tribal governments for provision of communication services on tribal land. And as a result, the FCC proposed the tribal engagement provisions to require those communication service providers to hold those kind of meaningful discussions with tribal leadership. So that's something that we're going to be looking at over the coming months. And the first reporting requirement that has been established for telecommunications providers is, I believe, July 1st. It's June or July. So that'll be coming up pretty soon. But I don't see any other questions or comments raised. So I will send out the PowerPoint slides to everyone that's attending, and then I'll also see what I can do about getting the presentation up on the website, our website, ncai.org, or through some other communications means. But I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and greatly appreciate your feedback and your questions. And also, I've been getting some comments about the SUDA provisions, the substantially underserved trust area, so I'll go ahead and share those with the group as well, since I wasn't able to adequately answer that. But I hope that this was a very informative webinar for you, and I'll be reaching out to you to see if we can get some sort of draft template or comments that we can come to consensus on, and hopefully get this proceeding moved to the next phase of rulemaking. And if Brian, if you want to provide any comments, and Matt as well.
Thank you, everybody, for attending, and thank you, Brian, for organizing. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Brian.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And again, like I said, I'll go ahead and send out some emails, and we'll try and see what we can do. Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye.